much. We're going to go right into our Q&A, and there is actually a question for Kelsey that was just posted, so you might as well do that while you just finish that presentation. Can you please explain if and how you have been able to get the crew office / astronauts involved in hardware tools development and test those science concepts of operations?
Yeah, I know that a lot of the speakers today have had astronauts involved in a lot of the analog testing that many of us have talked about today, but specifically for the JSC-based testing that we've mentioned, the benefit of having these JSC-based tests is we're actually to get a lot of crew member input and time because they're not having to travel for these longer, field-based tests. So we're actually able to integrate with large swaths of the astronaut office and cycle a lot of crew members in and out to get early end user feedback on a lot of the tools and operational concepts we're working on testing. We have crew members in all of the testing environments I mentioned today. They're built into our test teams. They come to our test planning meetings, and we really are able to interact with the crew office on an almost daily basis on a lot of the sort of tools and operational concepts we've been developing. They're also closely linked with the development of our crew training and mission support personnel training plan. So we're really heavily integrated with the crew office, and they are a major stakeholder in our XEVA flight operations team.
Thank you very much. And one quick follow-up to that, what imaging equipment is part of your crew suite for helmets and surface documentation?
So we interface very closely with the XEMU, or the spacesuit that's in development for lunar surface operations. So we're really up to speed on what their current plans are for what kind of imaging capabilities are going to be mounted on the suit. So we're able to provide feedback on those designs, as well as understand exactly how mission control personnel are going to be able to view and interact with that imagery. And we're also working on refining requirements for what handheld cameras need to look like during lunar surface EVA. So we're interfacing with the currently designed plans for the XEMU, as well as starting to envision if that's good enough, and if not, how we fill the gap to provide proper situational awareness for scientists back on Earth.
Thank you very much. So we had another question up from earlier in the session that was for Michael Evans. Do you see the job of astronauts to send samples up to the Gateway for analysis, or is there a mix of lab analysis in situ and from the Gateway, or coming back to here on Earth?
Yeah, I'm going to deal with both of those questions. Cindy made a comment also about processing on Gateway. I don't believe the astronauts will be processing samples once they're bagged. The concept that we had on Gateway, though, was we're in a conundrum. The only way to get anything back to Earth on Orion is inside in the pressurized volume. Orion has no external storage. So if you bring anything up to Gateway on the surface, you have to bring it inside where the crew is, and then you have to transfer it to inside storage on Orion. Maybe somebody down the road will come up with a trunk on an outside of a vehicle, perhaps Dragon. But to bring that sample from the surface inside, the concept we were using, working with the curation staff, is to double bag. Basically, once the sample has been captured on the surface and sealed, you then bring it up to Gateway, and while it's in the glove box, before you bring it into the pressurized environment, you double bag it, you seal it again, in case there was damage to it, that way you don't contaminate your crew on Gateway, and you don't contaminate the sample. So that was the concept of that. We're not talking at all about having the field geologists do mass spec or microscope or analysis of the samples, at least not in the near term. I mean, maybe somewhere down the road, but not now.
Thank you very much. There's another question from Brad Blair to everyone, and anyone can answer this. Is there a resource page or a doc summarizing NASA and the commercial analog site features and a schedule? And more importantly, has anyone assembled a list of scheduled solicitation releases and dates for funding field studies?
I'm not aware. It's a great question. It's certainly a resource that should exist. I'm not aware of like a NASA branded list of currently funded analog projects with a schedule or anything. It certainly seems like something we could use. And ditto for the solicitation release dates, but perhaps our headquarters colleagues would have a better answer for that question.
And I think that goes well with the comment that was left earlier. Is there any sort of methodology we think would work well to to give to everyone who has done field work or analog studies that can help comprise a chart that's like how things were communicated, the way things were sampled, and sort of collect a document that can bring all of this work into one comparable scale.
About keeping on jumping in, but I think that's certainly a great resource. I'm not sure, Marie, if you were referring to Brent's comment in the chat, who said it'd be a great resource to compile comparable procedures or data protocols or whatever across these different analog projects. And like I think Darlene brought up the special issue from Basalt, and there's a special issue from Desert Rats that talks about each specific analog, which are incredible resources. And it seems like the next step is then taking all of those resources and mapping them against one another.
Definitely. Let's see. Is there also, for your work, Kelsey, can you talk about the role of Capcom and Ground IV and how they could come into the Artemis role?
Yeah, I mean, that's come up over and over again this week, and I hope we can spend a lot of time on this in the breakout number 2 today. But I think there's a really rich trade space to talk about here, right? There's a lot of lessons learned for Station right now from having the Capcom continue to talk to the IV crew members, and then the Ground IV talking to the folks on EVA. And I think we really need to think about the smartest way to do that for accomplishing science objectives. And I think that gets at, cross-training flight controllers to speak science and scientists to speak flight controller. And I think that, that trade space is something we're going to need to practice with a lot. And it emphasizes the importance we've heard, so many times this week of the importance of these simulations to bring everybody together on the same page, and figuring out exactly that chart that I just showed, and I'll bring it up in the breakout again today, what that communication structure looks like from the scientists who are in the nitty gritty details of the science all the way up to the pointy end of the spear talking to the crew. I think that trade space is one that needs a lot more conversation, and I'm really excited to get into that during the second breakout today.
If I could add something, Kelsey, to that, we did find in the IVA environment, having the SMEs with a dedicated air-to-ground loop to the crew actually became a very efficient way to work through complicated procedures. And so, again, it gets into a bandwidth issue, it gets into a hierarchy issue. Allowing the SMEs to talk directly to crew in some situations is actually the right thing to do. And we didn't do that on Apollo. We have started doing that on ISS. I think it's definitely something we should be doing on Artemis.
I think the difference there is that those are crew members who are not in the EVA environment, where you're really restricted on time and you're really concerned about safety and consumables. So I think the model that ISS uses for SMEs to talk directly to crew members inside when they're working through the complex procedures works great. And perhaps we can leverage those lessons learned for the longer term sustained operations on the lunar surface. But for these, multi-hour EVAs, I think that's a really complex challenge that, I think we need to think more about.
Yeah, no, I was only addressing IVA, not EVA.
All right, great. We have some questions here for Pascal. What are the major lessons learned in the sampling protocols and over the years? And did you actually test using different formats of procedures, such as the ISS versus maybe other less strict formats?
Well, in terms of the sampling, one thing that really makes us maybe operate differently from sort of a one-off field site visit is that we have actually a field base. So first of all, what that means is that there are, throughout a particular season, opportunities, more than one, to revisit a site. So each traverse, each sortie to a, for a geological sampling campaign will bring back its day's harvest of rock samples, which are then high graded, sorted the same day, usually during the field campaign. And we don't do a lot of in situ analysis, mainly because the cost benefit of the time that it would take to do that on site versus actually spending your time visiting more sites and collecting samples is in favor of the latter. But we do high grade the samples. We sift through them because you can only fly so many back at the end of your field campaign. So it comes down to actually a limit in mass and of course a limit in volume for in terms of the samples that you can bring back. We therefore do some basic analysis on site. For example, we'll go as far as using a rock saw to cut up the rock. I've actually made a few thin sections some summers on site, but it was more to demonstrate that we could, rather than that being particularly useful for our iterations in sampling. But on the other hand, if you were there for longer term, if you were operating like in an Antarctic station where you were there for many months, I think it would then be very much worthwhile to equip the base with sample analysis capabilities, the ability to automate the fabrication of thin sections, scanning electron microscope sections as well. I mean, there are ways to do that automatically. I'm not sure that answers your question, but that's the extent to which we deal with the sampling.
Thank you very much. That was a great answer. We're going to switch now into our break.